Let my people vote. I'm one of the 43% of Americans who, according to Gallup, self-identify not as Republicans or Democrats, but as independent voters. In just my home state of Pennsylvania, the most critical battleground state in the 2024 presidential election, there are more than 1 million such registered voters, but we are one of 9 closed primary states in the nation where non-party affiliates are precluded from voting in primary elections, even though our tax dollars are being used to such contests. This week, I became a plaintiff in a legal action that seeks to change that. 3 other parties, including David Thornburg, who's the chair of Ballot PA Action, we have asked the state Supreme Court to exercise their King's Bench jurisdiction and declare the applicable Pennsylvania law to be unconstitutional. I've always taken voting seriously. I turned 18 in 1980 and have never missed a general election. Until I re-registered from Republican to Independent in 2010, I'd never missed a primary either. Having come of age in the party of Ronald Reagan and having even served in the administration of George Herbert Walker Bush, eventually I determined that the party had changed and no longer reflected what I had joined. Additionally, in a polarized media environment, I felt boxed in by a label that no longer fit. Audiences often judge you first by your party ID. I no longer wanted to be introduced on television with a Republican chyron. And I don't think that I should have to decide between my job and my vote. So during a routine driver's license renewal in 2010, when I was asked if I wanted to change my party registration, I said yes, and I became an independent or a non-party affiliate, as we call them at home. In Pennsylvania, there are currently 1.4 million voters, or 16% of the total registered electorate, who are not registered as Republican or Democratic. Here's another way to think of that. According to one of my next guests, Jeremy Gruber, who's the senior vice president at Open Primaries, 14 states, including Nebraska and New Hampshire, have less voters in total than the number of those who are independent voters in Pennsylvania. And Gruber notes that there are 30 million independent voters nationwide who are precluded from voting due to closed primaries. That means we don't get a say in primary elections, which are often destiny, effectively determining the outcome in a majority of my home state's House races and state Senate races. By the time we get a say in the general election, the contest is often already over. I would also argue that our missing voice is often one of moderation, which is in short supply in these polarized times. I firmly believe that when independent voters are excluded from the nomination process, we foster the rise of extremes at both ends of the political spectrum. And better would be a system that forces candidates to have to appeal to a broader cross-section of society, including those for whom compromise is not a dirty word. So I'm honored to have my name associated with this petition. And as one of our lawyers, Shane Inspector, said, denying a citizen the right to vote is the harshest form of taxation without representation. Joining me now is the aforementioned Jeremy Gruber, the Senior Vice President for Open Primaries, a nonpartisan organization that advocates for primary elections to be open and independent voters to participate. His group is supportive of the petition I've referenced. Seth Maskett sees it differently. He's a political science professor and director for the Center on American Politics at the University of Denver. Last month, he testified against the idea of open primaries in New York City. He also wrote this piece, A Case for Keeping Primary Voting to Party Members. I should also mention that we invited the Pennsylvania Secretary of State, Al Schmidt, to be on the program, but he declined. Professor, thanks so much for being here. I don't want you to feel like you're being tag teamed. The floor is yours to make the initial response to what I just said.
Thank you for having me on. So clearly, political parties are very important to our democracy and democracies all over the world. And, you know, basically our Congress is run by political parties. Our state legislatures, nearly all of them are run by political parties. And so the choices that parties make are very important. They are also membership organizations. And we can join a party if we want to participate in its decision-making processes. But I tend to believe that Republicans should not be picking Democratic nominees. Democrats should not be picking Republican nominees. Those decisions are made internally by a party. A primary election is very different from a general election. General elections are where we actually choose our elected officials. A primary election is where a party decides who is going to be on that ballot. And that's a decision that should be made by party members.
You would go so far, and I base this on what I read in the essay that I referenced, you'd go so far as to say that if you're in the minority in a very lopsided district, well, you should join the majority and try and do something about it. Is that a fair paraphrasing of what you wrote?
That's fair. And lopsided districts are a significant concern for our democracy. And most of us live in very lopsided districts. That's simply a nature of where people live in this country. Democrats tend to live near other Democrats. Republicans tend to live near other Republicans. That's something that can be addressed if we want through redistricting reform, by changing the style of election system that we have. That's not really something to be changed through primaries. But yeah, I would agree that if you live in a district that is very much dominated by one party, you can have more influence by joining that majority party. And simply for the purpose of participating in its primaries and choosing nominees who are more to your liking. If you want, you can also join the minority party and try to pick candidates who would have a better shot at making that district less lopsided. But
Jeremy
that doesn't
Gruber,
necessarily mean. Sorry, go ahead.
Jeremy, you've heard what the professor says. Should I just suck it up and either join the D's or join the R's?
Look, I mean, primaries are really not that different from the general election, despite what he says. Primaries are taxpayer-funded, government-administered elections. When you as a voter go into the primary to vote, your experience is exactly the same as the general election. You see the same poll workers, you vote on the same government-owned machines. The whole thing is administered by the Secretary of State. The only difference between a primary and a general election is who gets to participate. And despite the fact that officially candidates are elected in the general election, in most cases, candidates are actually elected in our primary elections, where less than 10% are competitive and half are uncontested. Whoever wins the primary in most races wins the general election. These are the most meaningful elections in our country. But that's actually beside the point. This is a voting rights issue. I'm an American citizen. I'm a registered voter. The highest good in our country is the right to vote, period. Nothing else comes close. Ever since women's suffrage through the civil rights arena, there have always been arguments claiming that there's a problem, there's a concern, there's an issue with a particular group having the right to vote. Those folks have always been on the wrong side of history because there is no reason why an American citizen shouldn't be able to vote in a public election. And that's it.
Professor, it's your turn. Go ahead.
So just responding to a few of those things, just because it's taxpayer funded doesn't mean I get to participate in it. My tax dollars pay for the GI Bill. I'm not eligible for that. My tax dollars pay for public universities that I can't get into. And that's perfectly fine. We're better off that these things exist in our society, but that doesn't mean we get to participate in all of them if we don't want to join the party. It's very easy to join a party. They don't require membership dues. They don't require loyalty oaths. We can also switch out if we decide we don't like it. I would also add that it kind of bothers me that we're talking about participating in a primary in terms of voter disenfranchisement. Voter disenfranchisement is obviously a very serious issue in this country today and in the past. The ability to participate in a general election is something that is guaranteed by the Constitution for essentially all adults. And that has been, we've seen situations even today where it's harder for poorer people than wealthy people to actually vote. It can be harder for, in some states, people of color to participate than white people. Those are very serious concerns. Access to a primary is not the same as that. Primary is joining a party for the purpose of participating in deciding who gets to be on the ballot. That is not the same as a general election.
Professor, will you respond to Jeremy's argument that the primaries are the whole ball of wax, that by a combination of this is now my contribution, but by virtue of gerrymandering or self-sorting, the reality is that most races are determined in the primary. You've got this outsized influence of a polarized media. And the bottom line, I would argue, and this is what really draws me to this cause, is we have a system now that rewards the extremes and that we're excluding the 43% of the country, a plurality who want to have a say and don't want to be identified with either extreme. Your response?
No, I certainly understand that, people don't necessarily want to identify with one of the parties. They don't necessarily want to join one of the parties, even though it's fairly easy to do that. On the issue of extremism, I was a co-author on a study a few years back looking at essentially all the state legislatures across the country and looking at the different primary election systems that we have to put people in there. And whether you're talking about closed primaries or semi-closed or open primaries, none of that seems to make a difference for how extreme or how moderate the elected officials are who come out of those systems. That is, this doesn't, whether you make these elections closed or open, that doesn't seem to make a difference for the sort of people that we produce.
Jeremy, will you
and
respond
we
to
also
that?
see in some places.
A quick response
Sorry, go
from
ahead.
Jeremy, because I'm limited on time. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Look, there's plenty of evidence that voter participation goes up, that legislators become more accountable and more responsive and less extreme in more open systems. But that's beside the point. This is a voting rights issue. American voters should not be shut out of public elections by the state. That's what's happening around the country. There are 30 million independent voters in this country. 10,000 Americans leave the Republican and Democratic parties every single day. They should have the right to vote no matter what their political affiliation is. The state right now around the country is telling voters that they should have to join a private political party if they want to vote in a publicly funded and administered election. That's not right. That's not fair. And it's damn right un-American.
Professor, you get the final word. Professor, go ahead quickly. I'm going to give you the final word. Go ahead.
I would disagree that that's un-American. These are, as we were discussing, these are private membership organizations. They get to make decisions, and it's not right that people who are not members, who choose not to become members, get to participate in its decision-making processes. It is very easy to join a party. It's very easy to leave a party. And people who want to participate in those primaries are welcome to do that by joining that party.
I appreciate both of you, and I wish we had more time. Thank you for being here.